Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, HIPAA Compliance Audit. What is it and why do I need it? So I know you all signed up for that and that's what we're going to talk about today. Here's who I have with me today. So my name is Janice Snyder. I'm a partner here at McConley & Asbury. I am our Director of Assurance Services and I spend a lot of time working with healthcare organizations, nonprofits, and manufacturing clients. I have with me Dave Hammarberg. So you see Dave is a CPA, a Certified Information Systems Auditor, Certified Information Systems Security Professional, and a bunch of other acronyms I've looked up before, but gotta be honest, Dave, I don't know all of them. That certainly makes him an expert. As one of my partners in the firm, he is an expert in SOC and cybersecurity and forensic examinations, HIPAA compliance, which is very important for today's webinar. We also have with us Lynnanne Bocchi. Lynnanne is a manager. Lynnanne, you're getting close to the number of credentials that Dave has. So as a CPA and a certified internal auditor and certified information systems auditor. So Lynnanne conducts these HIPAA compliance audits in our firm alongside of Dave and also does a lot of SOC engagements and cybersecurity. So I'm excited to have them here with me today. My role is going to be to host and ask a lot of questions that hopefully can help a lot of the healthcare organizations that I work with as we go through this. And they're going to be the experts that answer all of my questions. For those of you who don't know, McConley & Asbury is an accounting and business advisory services firm with offices in Camp Hill, Lancaster, and Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. We provide a range of services to organizations across a variety of industries, as you can see on the screen. And we encourage you to visit our website to learn more about us. You see it down there in the right-hand corner. Most of you probably already have since you were able to sign up for today. Before we start, I want to mention that today's session is meant to be an open dialogue. So Dave, Lynnanne, and I are going to go back and forth quite a bit. We have topics here that we want to cover. This is designed to be very high level and to introduce this concept to you. But if you have deeper questions and you want to ask us some of the tough things, please put them in the chat feature. We welcome those, and we do believe, because it's high level, that we're going to have time to go through those questions at the end. So please submit them. Also remember that we have 3 polling questions today. That is the next slide. If you do want your CPE, please make sure that you answer all 3 questions. We're going to give you a little extra time to make sure you do that. Sometimes they go by so quickly, but since there's only 3, it's very important that you don't miss any of those questions. So with that, we're going to get started with a HIPAA compliance audit. So I'm going to ask Dave to kick us off here. So Dave, I obviously know what HIPAA is. I think a lot of individuals on this call do as well. Anyone that's ever been to the doctors, you sign that little HIPAA form that says you know what it is. So we have a little bit of a baseline knowledge of HIPAA, which has been around for over 20 years. But tell me a little bit, Dave, about what is this HIPAA compliance audit? I know it's not new, but I'm hearing a lot more about it recently. A lot of my clients are as well.
Thank you, Janice. Yeah, I think the term HIPAA compliance audit's a little bit confusing because you have third parties calling it HIPAA compliance audit, and then you have a HIPAA compliance audit that's enforced by the Office of Civil Rights and regulated by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So what we're talking about today is third party audits, compliance audits. You do not, obviously there's a chance you're going to be audited by the Office of Civil Rights or Department of Health and Human Services. Your goal is to try not to get audited. Obviously randomly you could get selected, but really would do your best not to. And we'll talk about that in further slides of, best practices probably not to get audited. So
are you saying that most people don't want an audit? I mean, I like to do audits, but I personally don't like to get audited. So,
well, there's some audits that make you better and prevent worse things from happening. And that's really what we're talking about here. The average fine for a HIPAA issue or from the OCR is $1 million. And that was last year. So it's a huge amount of money. And so you may not want to go through a compliance audit, but are you sure you're in compliance with the actual rules of HIPAA? breach notification requirements, et cetera. That's really the question. So that's really why HIPAA compliance audits are coming up. And I think, you know, the real big reason why compliance audits are coming up is because patients, customers are getting more sophisticated. They're understanding what HIPAA is. They're understanding they have to protect their information. So again, we'll get more into that into slides, but a compliance audit is going to look at your design of controls and operating effectiveness of controls. So when you go through the audit, is the control designed properly, and is it working effectively? And that's going to give you peace of mind at the end of the audit that, hey, I do have my ducks in a row and I am ready if I do get a government audit. So that's the big thing. And again, you're spending a fraction of the price up front for an audit as you would be, going with a fine. The audits are usually good for a year. And I'm not sure I have any other thoughts on this slide.
Well, that's all right. I see in the middle here, it talks about the personal health information. So, my kids have kept me on my toes the last 5 months. They've both had hospital stays. So I don't recommend that for anyone that can avoid that. But certainly their information's out there and my information is out there in a lot of ways. So I see here it focuses on the technical, physical, and administrative safeguards. Anything you can add to that to help me out?
That's a great question. So most of our compliance audits are going to focus on the HIPAA security rule and the breach notification requirements, those two areas. And the crazy thing about the HIPAA security rules are, we'll get into covered entities and, when you get information from a provider or whatnot, you're not actually seeing the HIPAA security rules. So it may be, it's like when you played phone, whatever, what was that phone thing when you were a kid?
Yeah, like phone call or phone.
Yeah. By the time you got the message, it was different, right? So are you really in compliance? But again, these compliance audits are really scoped to the individual, whether that's a large hospital, whether that's a small dentist, chiropractor, et cetera. And that scoping will take into account what the audit covers. But again, majority of them will cover the security rule and the breach notification requirements. Other things like physical site evaluations, et cetera, usually don't get into. But again, that's a big one as we look at a remote workforce. I know a lot of nurse practitioners, doctors that are working remote now. How does that affect HIPAA? If a family member sees that information, overhears that information, I mean, that's a breach. So it's getting harder to be compliant than easier in certain aspects.
Sure. I think I'd have a concern, Dave. You don't want family members hearing your personal medical information or those meetings, but this seems to be on a bigger scale that someone could steal massive amounts of data.
Oh, for sure.
I'm worried about who can access that data. In an audit, I always think of financial statement, who can access it and who can change the data.
Right.
It seems a lot more drilled down on the access side.
Right. Yeah, and as we get to future slides, you'll see that the reason why the health data is so much more wanted. There's probably a better word for that, but it's over financial data. It's just something that you can get more for it, dark web, et cetera.
Great. Thanks, Dave. You've referenced future slides quite a few times, so let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, my problem always is giving away all the information on the first slide. Then I feel like the next slide, I'm like, whoops, we already talked about that.
We'll create a little bit of anticipation here.
That's right.
So now I kind of know high level, we're going to end up with a report. It's going to say that I'm following or the organization, the entity is following all of these rules. But talk to me about who needs a HIPAA compliance audit.
Another great question. We have three people here, or three entities here: covered entities, business associates, and I would say the others would be subcontractors. And I think a lot of covered entities, whether it's a hospital, a small outfit, but probably the larger outfits probably have a lot of internal controls. Their ducks in a line with HIPAA. The problem with not getting a third party to look at your compliance is you sometimes overlook things. I drive my, it's funny because, my wife will drive her car all day long, for weeks, and I'll get in and I'm like, do you hear that knock? No, I didn't hear any knock. I'm like,
That'll totally be me. I don't hear it. It's all good.
it's the third party, you get into the car and you're like, there's a knock. And sure enough, there is. So, I think when you go into, even a place that is locked down fairly well, and do a compliance audit, which is going to include a risk analysis, a gap analysis, policy development, business associate compliance management, if you're doing it for a covered entity. And you're really going to find out if you're ready for a government audit. And I think the biggest part of those two are risk analysis and gap analysis. So it's a, I think it's a great thing to strengthen your environment by a third party.
Great. So Dave, you mentioned a few things. So covered entities, people providing treatment, hospitals, clinics, dental office, labs, anywhere you can walk in, urgent care facilities. But does this also go further? Like we have a health and welfare plan. I audit a lot of health and welfare plan clients. Are they covered entities?
Yeah, it seems like it's always expanding. I mean, if you have a self-insured health plan in your organization, you're a covered entity. I know a lot of clients that really have nothing to do with health insurance or health care, but they have a self-insured health plan for their staff, employees, and now you are a covered entity. So it goes beyond, like you said, nursing homes, clinics, chiropractors, dentists. I like to pick on dentists because I just got a root canal, so I have enough. So don't take it the wrong way. I'm still coming out of that. Anyway, healthcare clearinghouses, stuff like that, and then business associates. You're looking at, we're a CPA firm, could be a business associate, and again, the compliance audit is going to be different depending on whether you're a covered entity or you're a business associate. And again, it goes back to that scoping piece.
And I know, Dave, we're a business associate. We do a lot of audits of healthcare organizations, and they come to me and say, hey, Janice, sign this form so we can give you access to patient records and the samples and the limited amount of information that we want. And I go through it and I say, yeah, these are all the things I'm comfortable that we're doing. Then I turn it over to Dave and his team and I say, Dave, are you sure? And do we have all these safeguards in place? And,
yeah, you are a business associate if you have access to ePHI, which is electronic PHI. So providing services to those covered entities makes you a business associate. So there is a lot of business associates out there. And I think the covered entities are getting a lot better with the business associate agreements, identifying their business associates, et cetera. And again, I think that goes back to the sophisticated customer. 1996, when this came out, no one knew what it was. Customers, weren't used to breaches. They weren't used to protecting their information. We're in a different world now.
Well, and I know these agreements keep getting longer and longer and longer, and there's more and more things that we already have in place, but they're asking about more and more of them just to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's someone trying to put more liability on somebody else. It's like cybersecurity insurance nowadays. 2 years ago, that was maybe a 10-question form for cyber insurance. Now it's 4 pages and you have to, go through everything, whether it's multi-factor authentication, all sorts of things. So the way things are going with compliance is, more and more, and we're trying to put more and more on someone else. So I really see that the same way with covered entities and business associates.
Great, thanks, Dave. And there's others here. What are others?
Subcontractors. So say for us, CPA firm, if we contract our data in the cloud, that would be a subcontractor. So there is a lot of subcontractors out there that probably don't even know that they should be HIPAA compliant. And the question for the business associate is, you probably are responsible to make sure that that data is secure. So I think we'll hear more about that in the future here. And
yeah,
I really haven't heard of subcontractors getting audited, but I think it's coming.
Yeah, and I think This just paints the picture of how broad this is. Everybody knows that healthcare providers, well, I think everybody knows, has this protected health information and electronic health records and all of the grants and monies and things that have came out over the last decade so that everyone could put that in place. And then you see all of the business associates coming in, like accounting firms, like all those, some of those with data in the cloud are also business associates, and some would end up being consultants and falling into the other bucket. But it's so broad on who this could apply to. And I think that level of scrutiny and focus is just going to continue to grow, and the field is going to continue to expand.
Right. And I think with the fines going up, you know, no one wants $1 million fine, you know, and I'm sure a dentist office, none in particular, couldn't handle $1 million fine. So, you know, or, you know, pharmacy or a nursing home. Now, you know, a large hospital might be different, but, you know, and I think the more we see things like, more we see those large fines, it's going to be pushed down to others from a liability standpoint. That which makes you want to be a little, you know, am I compliant? You know, it goes back to peace of mind. Is it worth it to have someone come in and tell you your controls are designed well and they're operating effectively? And that's not, you know, to, you know, maybe the covered entity says, hey, you need to have these 12 things in line as a business associate. But those 12 things don't, you know, those might be the highlights as opposed to actually seeing the HIPAA security rule and identifying that. So there's a lot to it.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I'm going to move us forward to our first polling question. So my organization represents which of the following groups? So we've just defined for you a covered entity. Are you a business associate? Are you other, maybe one of those consultants or a cloud providers or anything like that? And keep in mind that these definitions are very, very broad. So, or are you none of the above? So let's get a feel for our audience here. So any guesses on what they are, Dave or Lynnanne?
I think we should have had a button for several of the above, since you
that's true. One. Yeah, we certainly fall into, well, pick the highest level one, I guess. So I would have to go with covered entity if I was picking the highest level one. So you're right, Lynnanne, we could have had an all of the above. All right, so if you have 5 more seconds, probably 2 at this point, before we close out the polling question. All right, so we have a lot of covered entities. Great, step 1, you recognize that. That's fantastic. A lot of businesses, 22%, about a quarter of you are business associates, and some of you are none of the above. So you were really interested in saying, what is a compliance audit and why do I need it? So hopefully we can at least answer that for you today.
It's great to see that, because a lot of these webinars, we might get, 30, 40% that actually, the webinar means a whole lot to them, but it looks like there's a lot of people on this webinar that this could be a big impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great, Dave. Thanks. So we touched on this a little bit because we can hardly define a HIPAA compliance audit and who needs it without touching on why now and what's changed. So Dave, you certainly said a lot to lead us into this, but can you touch on some of the things that are top of mind to you? We have several on the screen here and on this slide as to what is changing and why would we consider this now as opposed to a couple of years ago or waiting a few years into the future?
Yeah, I mean, as you can read there, I won't read word for word there, but I really think it goes back to the sophistication of the patient, them knowing exactly what that health record is, what HIPAA, is, and them being able to really, with enough patients complaining, cause an audit. So I think that's changed a lot. We've seen HIPAA since 1996, so it's everywhere. And enhanced fraud activity. We've seen fraud go up in all areas: certified fraud examiner, healthcare fraud, nonprofit fraud, construction fraud. This is just another area where someone's trying to make a buck for nothing. And you can make a lot of money selling health records. So I think if I have to work less and make more money, that's what we're all trying to do, right? We're trying to work less and make more money. Well, if I'm a fraudster, that's what I'm doing. I'm collecting health records instead of credit card numbers, right? So if I have Janice's health record, I can continually use that until she dies, and probably after that, right? But that might only include for voting, but that's another note.
Well, it's true, Dave. Like my health information, my social security number, my date of birth, as much as sometimes we may want to wish we're younger or change that, these things never change.
Right.
Our
right.
addresses can change, but not that frequently. You just don't move because your records have been hacked, right?
Right.
But you will close a bank account or a credit card account. You can close and change financial information, but you're not going to change the health information very easily.
Right. Yeah. You know, if I'm a fraudster, attacker, hacker, whatever you want to call them, and I get Janice's information from an identity theft standpoint, from a financial standpoint, credit card information, I may cause her a bad half a year, you know, and she's got to deal with it, et cetera. But it's not a lifetime.
Let's not do that, Dave. I'm just going to say right now that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not a lifetime.
Strategy.
It's not a lifetime of pain, which I think could be the case with health records, which is why it's so important. And you know, the other thing, you know, for anyone on this call right now, I mean, everyone should have their credit locked down. It's not going to cause you never to get identity theft, never to have any issues. But you know, the 3 credit bureaus, 2 are free and one's $10 a month. So you're paying $120 a year to lock down your credit. Sure, every time you apply for a credit card, you're gonna have to unfreeze your account. But boy, you know, $120 is cheap insurance to make sure that your identity is not stolen. That might get a little off our topic here, but I thought it would be a you know, a bonus to just say that.
Yeah, it's not directly the HIPAA compliance audit, but it is the reason these things are getting a lot more scrutiny and a lot more attention, and why more organizations are considering them.
Right, right. And then sophisticated phishing and hacking schemes. I mean, everyone sees the phishing emails, the spear phishing. The attackers, you know, they're making billions, and that's why we're seeing this increase. Every year it increases. So we're just going to see a whole lot more social engineering, stuff like that. And I think, you know, of the top common HIPAA violations that we've seen, lack of employee training is top of the list. So are you training your employees correctly? Do they know what they should know from a HIPAA standpoint? You know, just going through a couple of top ones, medical record mishandling, whether that's computers locked, unlocked, you know, paper filing. The attackers of these days, again, are trying to work as little as possible. So let's make them work hard. Obviously, we could do 100% of everything and still have a breach, but let's make them work for it. And then the third one, insecure technology. You know, we got to make sure we're up on patching, we're up on updates, et cetera.
So Dave, a HIPAA compliance audit is going to test to make sure your organization is doing a lot of these things to try and prevent an issue, a breach, a hack.
For sure. I mean, we're going to be looking at the design of the controls, which for employee training, we're going to look at what that training consists of, how often it is, and that they're signed off by every employee that has access to protected records. So yeah, again, you know, the HIPAA compliance report is going to, or audit is going to run over a period of time. And again, that's going to make sure during that period of time, the control operates effectively.
And Lynnanne, you shared with me earlier as we were preparing for this, you had a medical records hack, right? And something you're looking out for. Nobody wants to hear that, but it does happen.
Yes, just received it in the mail this week. So it is happening.
Yeah, it's funny when Lynnanne said that she got hacked, she went on to do the credit monitoring, and she's like, oh, I already did it. You know, we're getting hacked so much, whether it's your credit card, you know, payroll company, that we're almost becoming numb to it. So it's definitely an issue.
Definitely that increased fraud activity, as you note there. So I'm going to move us on to the next slide, because Dave, with his fraud background and IT background, shared some data here with me that is shocking.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead, Dave.
it depends where you get the data from, but this covers, you know, you might come up with a slightly different number, but it is generally the same everywhere. You know, you get a credit card number, you might be able to use that for, you know, what, a month until someone notices. maybe less, maybe a little bit more, depending on, the problem with fraud is they get greedy and they put too much on. So if I put $40 on Janice's credit card each month, she may not, she would notice. Maybe somebody else would.
Probably.
She would. But someone else may not notice $40 each month. But now I put $4,000 on Janice's card, and all of a sudden, well, she knows. So I can use that once, or a couple times, and that's 30 days. But when you go to actual health records, health records include social security number, date of birth, where you live, all sorts of different things that are really valuable to a attacker. And you can see here, $250 each for a health record. So if I was an attacker and my goal is to work less, that's where I'm going to attack. And am I going to attack the big hospital, or am I going to go a small, chiropractor or dental place? Which is the easier target? And you could go either way. You might have a little bit more training in a small lab, and someone got missed in a hospital. So there's chances either way, but generally attackers are going for health records, and you can see that's why, just pure money.
Well, yeah, you get 10,000 records, you can make 2.5 million off of that. That's a pretty good day's work.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Actually pretty frightening.
Yes.
All right, Dave. So that's a little bit about why now and what's changed. So that leads us right into our next polling question. Go ahead, Dave.
So my job is required which of the following: completion of a HIPAA compliance audit, review of another organization's HIPAA compliance audit, to consider the need for a HIPAA compliance audit. I've never heard of a HIPAA compliance audit. Now, if you've never heard of a HIPAA
today, so obviously you've heard it for the last 30 minutes. So
if you haven't heard of a HIPAA compliance audit, or HIPAA in general, then you probably have never gone to the doctor. You probably are very healthy or dead.
But just because you've heard of HIPAA doesn't mean you've heard of a HIPAA compliance
audit.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they're completely different things, but I think when a user is going to a doctor's office, HIPAA, means confidentiality to them, security to them. And I think that
right, they have about 5 more seconds just so everybody knows. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so I think in 1996, HIPAA meant something different than it does now. And I just think with news, social media, we're a lot further along. And you can see the results here. So we have 13% that haven't heard of a compliance audit. And again, these compliance audits are mandatory, right? But the question is, are you 100% sure that you're compliant? Could you do a compliance audit internally? Say you're a huge hospital and you have internal audit doing taking care of your HIPAA compliance. Sure, you could do it internally if they're separate individuals. Most organizations don't have that complexity or those resources to get that done. So I'm not saying by any means that you have to do a HIPAA compliance audit. I'm saying peace of mind and having all your ducks in a row, I would think it would be good thing to do.
Great. So, well, and at least 13% of our audience out there, they're now going to know what a HIPAA compliance audit is. So, and they're going to hope and pray their organization doesn't need one, right? But the peace of mind might be worth it. So, but most of you are here because your organization is considering that need for a HIPAA compliance audit. So I think Dave could certainly chime in on this, as Dave and Lynnanne do most of the firm's HIPAA compliance audits, or actually probably all of them. But Lynnanne, talk to us a little bit now. A lot of organizations are assessing, do we or don't we need a HIPAA compliance audit, and what is the value in that? So as they're thinking about that, tell us a little bit about what happens next. So, okay, you got my attention. I understand that these are happening now. I understand that my organization might need this, or this might be a prudent thing to do to, increase the level of our security and our controls. But now what? What happens next?
So evaluating your organization's needs, obviously you need to determine if you'd benefit from a HIPAA compliance audit. And based on what we've already learned so far, as widespread as PHI is nowadays, a lot of people are covered entities or business associates and probably do have a need for one. Is it a contract requirement? You may have a contract with a customer who's requiring it of you. That is what we have seen in the ones we have done so far. And would you like to have an actual document by a third-party assessor to provide to customers and clients to show them that, yes, you have been audited by an external third party and found to be in compliance with all of the HIPAA rules? And
So,
finally, oh, go ahead.
You touched base on large customers are now saying, hey, I want this and I want to see your results. Is that relatively new? Or has that been happening all along? It's just happening a little more?
It probably was happening all along, but I definitely think that it is happening more. As Dave indicated, customers want to make sure that they know what you are doing with their personal data. And that is one way that they can be sure of it, by requiring you to have a third-party audit completed for it.
Yeah, the HIPAA compliance audits really seem to be picking up. We do one of the fastest growing areas of our firm are SOC audits, SOC 2 audits, which are audits of security at a service organization. We match controls to a criteria, and there's a lot of SOC 2 clients that we have now that are managed services, maybe for healthcare entities, et cetera, that are now the user entities that are requiring them to do a SOC 2 audit are now requiring them to do a HIPAA HIPAA assessments, third party.
So real quick, Dave, for those of us that don't live and breathe it every day, one sentence, what's a SOC 2 audit? Put them on the spot there.
SOC 2 audit is going against a COSO framework. A little bit more than that, but a COSO framework to look at design and operating effectiveness of controls against that framework. And we're looking at the service organization. So we scope it to, say it's an application developer. We're looking at the controls surrounding the design and operating effectiveness of the application development, whether that's change management, logical access, physical security. So that's more than one sentence.
But there's a lot of similarities there to what a HIPAA compliance audit would be, although the criteria you're measuring against is different.
A lot of times, yes. A lot of times we can come in, especially from a SOC 2 audit standpoint, and take those controls, use 100% of those controls in the HIPAA security rule. Now there's going to be additional controls to fulfill those requirements, but we can map those. If you're using a NIST framework or another security framework, we can map those controls back to the security requirement for HIPAA. So it's not like you're starting over, but it's starting somewhere. And that's where I would start if I was an organization. I would say, hey, what framework am I using, if any? Take those controls and map them over just to see where the gap analysis is, where the gaps are.
So Dave, you had no idea this question's coming, but I'm thinking, like, we started in the Sarbanes-Oxley world and talking about all these controls. A lot of organizations had 300, 400 key controls, and it was just kind of ludicrous. And they've narrowed that down and they focus. And I hear a lot of organizations now 100, 150 controls. What kind of scope and controls are you looking at with a HIPAA compliance audit? And I know this can vary drastically, and there can be add-ons to that, but give me a sense here.
That's a good question. It could be all over the map. It really depends on the size of the organization, the complexity of the organization, and the scope. The scope's the big thing. I'm not even sure. I mean, you could be talking 150, 200 controls, fairly easy, and then upward. But again, and it depends how someone considers a control. I like to make a control where, I've seen controls put in paragraphs where there's like 6 controls, so if you do that, you can have a lot less. But I like to test that way, the design and operating effectiveness. And then if we have an issue, we don't have an issue with 8 controls, we have an issue with 1 control. But it is, and again, what are you doing the assessment on? Is it just the security rule and the breach notification requirements, or is it more? But again, those two are the high level ones that we usually do the audit over.
And is it pretty common that you start with the breach notification and the security rules, and then add on from there? Are they like the baseline you start with?
Those are usually the ones we stick with. So we're usually not adding any others. that's usually the base. Now, I won't say that we don't add any other things, but usually those two will cover the majority of it.
Great, thanks. All right, back to Lynnanne. I interrupted with all my questions.
That's no problem. And so once you decide that you do want an external auditor to assist you with this, not your internal audit department or whatever else, someone else with a lot of HIPAA experience in your organization, you know, not all firms do HIPAA compliance, and you want to make sure that you find someone who has some strong healthcare and cybersecurity and internal control background so that they can complete all of the areas of the assessment.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that came together for us is we do SOC reports, SOC 2. That's the last time I'll try to say that. You know, and then we have a huge healthcare audit practice. So with those two together and marrying those people together, this firm is a firm of just people that work together, like to work together, and it just fit perfectly into what we do. So it really wasn't a stretch. You know, some firms would have to hire a bunch of people to get it done, different specialties, et cetera. But we had the high-end specialty on the security side, and then we had the healthcare professionals. So it was a sort of a marriage that really worked.
Great, thanks, Dave.
Yeah. And so a HIPAA pre-assessment will be the first step that you would go through whenever you decide that you do want to do a HIPAA compliance audit. And actually, if you move to the next slide, Janice, a lot of the details around the HIPAA pre-assessment are there. So the first thing we're going to do whenever we do a pre-assessment with a client is help you develop controls. And as Dave said, we will, if you already have an existing control framework, SOX or COSO, NIST, ISO 27001, whatever, we will take that and map that to the HIPAA rules. And we will see where you have gaps. And then we'll work with you to either fill those gaps with controls that you already have in place, but just don't have documented yet, or we will help you to develop controls that you need to fill those gaps. The process pretty much goes at the pace that the company would like to go. We have done them in 3 to 6 months as our usual, but we have done them in less time than that. And we have also done them in much more time than that. So it's just how much resources you want to devote to it.
And I think it, you know, you might think, oh, the larger the company, the longer it takes. In our experience, a lot of times the larger the company, the more complex, the more controls they have, the more processes and procedures they have outlined, and it goes smoother. So it really depends.
Yeah, I agree. And so then what we do once we feel like we have controls in place that meet all of the HIPAA requirements, we have a second review by another partner in our group who also is very experienced in this area, who probably will come up with some additional suggestions for controls that we should add. And then we actually, in order to ensure the controls are designed and operating effectively, we will do walkthroughs of every control to make sure that you have documentation in place for when the audit period actually begins. We will be able to come and ask you for evidence and test that evidence to make sure that the control is operating effectively.
And we're suggesting controls here. Management is responsible for the controls, the design of the controls, and that's important to note. Management is in charge of these controls. You know, we may have suggestions, and we will have suggestions. Working with other clients, we'll have a list of suggestions, which I think is a benefit for the client to see what others are doing. Obviously, you know, we don't say client names, et cetera, but you know, we have a lot of depth in the control library.
Yes, yes. And also during this time, we will be working with the client to create a narrative or a description that goes in the report, which is an overview of the company as well as sort of like a narrative, basically, of all the controls that will be in the report. And we also will help you to identify any user control considerations that you need for the report, which are controls that your users need to have in place in order to be able to rely upon your controls. And we'll also help you to identify if you have any subservice organizations, because if you do, we will also include complementary subservice organization controls, which are those controls that the subservice organization is performing on your behalf. So we will do all that during the pre-assessment phase.
So you're really outlining where the controls are.
Yes.
So when you do have an audit, by the government, hey, this individual is responsible for this, and this subservice organization is responsible for this. It's really, I think, comforting to know who's responsible for what.
Yes, good point. Yes. And then we conclude at the end of this pre-assessment phase, we are able to offer you actually a type 1 HIPAA compliance report at that point, which will talk about the design of your controls. It will not talk about whether they are operating effectively or not, but it might be valuable to the organization if they have a contract where they are looking for it as of a certain point in time, or if they would just like to have it on hand. And we also at that point will then talk about selecting the audit period, which must be at least 6 months long, but it can be any period that the client would like after that 6 months. A lot of times we'll have clients pick whatever amount of months they need to make it end at the time period they'd like it to end, and then the next year it'll be a full year audit from that standpoint.
So it sounds like you want to guarantee success, not guarantee, but as much as possible, you want everything to be designed, to do the walkthroughs, and have a pretty high likelihood of success before you move to that audit. So this is a very collaborative process to say, think about this, you should do this, maybe do this instead, but to make sure that you're not missing any of those controls that you need to ensure you're compliant with HIPAA, with those requirements.
Correct. Yeah, we're pretty much not done with the pre-assessment until we're generally feel confident that we can get through the audit period with outstanding results. And that's why it takes longer for some clients, because we're not going to say, hey, 6 months is over, we're ready to do the audit, and it is what it is. We're going to help you through, and if there's things that need to be in place, we have partners that can help with different things, whether that's multi-factor authentication, penetration testing, maybe you need a SIM, those technical aspects, if we can't do it, we have partners that can do it. So it's a process. And like I said, it varies on how long it takes. If you're a firm or a healthcare organization that is well established, good policies and procedures, you might fly through it quicker than a smaller healthcare organization.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I'm going to move us on to the next slide, but as you're talking about this and the pre-assessment, I think my son's in martial arts, and I know that they do pre-testing and all this preparation in so many classes, and they don't let him test for the next level unless they're pretty much assured he's going to pass. And it sounds like this is similar.
Yes, exactly. The pre-assessment is not a requirement, but it is very valuable, I believe, and we're trying to set the client up for success when we start the audit period.
Great. So that leads on this slide. The pre-assessment is the key to success. So now talk a little bit about the audit itself, but maybe more importantly, the outcome, the report that comes with that, and who the users might be. Right.
So one of the things that I didn't mention yet with regard to the controls that we put in place is the HIPAA rules actually have required controls, and then they have addressable controls. And when we're working with you to develop controls, obviously the required ones you must have a control for, we will help you with the addressable controls to determine if they're applicable to your organization or not. And that varies widely. You could find that almost all of the addressable controls are not applicable to you, or they are applicable to you. But that way you are not trying to create controls for a situation that does not reasonably exist for your organization.
When we get that could probably vary greatly, right, Lynnanne, between those who are the covered entities versus the business associates or the consultants.
Yes,
right?
Yes, definitely.
So still not one size fits all for any one of them, right?
Yes, yes, very much. And the opinion that we give is actually on the description that is that is completed and owned by management, which ends up in the report, and the suitability of the design and the operating effectiveness of the controls, which are written up in the description. They are also the controls which are individually listed in the report, similar to a SOC report. If you've seen that, there's an entire section which just lists all of the controls and whether they had exceptions or did not have exceptions. But we say we're expressing our opinion on the description, not on the individual controls themselves. And the audit period report is a type 2 report. So we are opining on the design and the operating effectiveness of the controls.
So Lynnanne, going back to who are the users of this report and who gets the most benefit out of it? We, obviously, the fastest growing area of our firm is the SOC area. We know who benefits from that. I think it's a little bit more, a little different in the HIPAA reports. Discuss a little bit about who you think the sort of the beneficiaries of this kind of report is, besides just peace of mind for the individuals responsible for these controls. Who does it help?
Okay, so right in our opinion, similar to a SOC audit, we will say that this is a restricted use report, which means it can be used internally or externally at the company's discretion by its internal auditors, by its customers, by any clients that it may have. It could also be used for prospective clients. And then obviously, as Dave said, just for management as well, to be as an insurance policy.
Right. Yeah. We've seen it very helpful for people trying to break into the healthcare field. So if you're getting a SOC 2 because you have this application for, say, heart monitoring or whatever, getting in, that SOC 2 does a lot, but the HIPAA with the SOC 2 really means a lot.
Right.
Are you covering all your bases? And we've seen that with international companies as well as, in the US.
Yeah.
Domestic.
So it does say here at the bottom, so I go to all this effort, and obviously I've had a pre-assessment, which means I'm going to be pretty successful in my audit. But let's say I have this audit and maybe it didn't go as smooth as I wanted. Like, do I have to share this report?
You do not, unless it's a requirement as part of your contract or something along those lines. But no, you don't.
But certainly I promote openness, honesty, and transparency in all that we do. But it could be internal or external.
Yeah, we don't file this with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They never see it. Again, the hard part about selling something that isn't compliance related is it's not compliance related. I'm not forcing Janice to do something because she has to. She has to get a driver's license. Well, you could do this. You don't have to do this. So, are you confident enough that you can make it through an audit, a real government audit? That's really what it comes down to. And I think, in our day in life, stress is a big thing. And I would think this would lower stress on most people.
Yep. This is a lot about peace of mind, preparedness, and in some cases, business lines you might want to move into, or customers or new customers you want to work with to give them the comfort that you're meeting these requirements.
Right.
Yeah, and I love these kind of audits because it makes the institution stronger. Everyone comes out if you're stronger. There's no one that we've done that we said, hey, 100%, right? There's no gaps. So you're going to come out of this with, you might say, more work, but you're going to be stronger for it. And as we go year to year, if your security was really top notch 3 years ago and you didn't do anything, well, guess what? You've fallen
Not
behind.
anymore.
So, we have to adapt and we have to continually get better. And I think that's why these are yearly reports. And whenever your environment changes, you're really rethinking HIPAA. Now, if your environment doesn't change, you're probably rethinking it every year. But employees are changing. We're going, everyone's hiring, changing employees. Are you training new hires correctly? All these things, and then the people in charge with compliance, they're always changing. So again, more and more reasons why a compliance audit would make you sleep better at night.
And the $1 million fine, or the $250 per record that your data can garner on the black market.
Right. And beyond that, if you're a hospital or chiropractor, and you're fined, that's not going to stay quiet for too long. So, you have a choice of your healthcare provider. That's America, right? So, are you going to go to some place that has spilled all the beans about everyone else or are you going to go somewhere else? So it's bad press. So another reason.
Right. And I actually also mentioned I worked for a company previous to McConley that did receive a fine from the OCR as a result of improperly disposing of PHI. And in addition to the $1 million fine, they also had to implement a strong corrective action program. And that program included revising policies and procedures, retraining workforce members, conducting internal monitoring, and they had to engage a qualified external third-party assessor to report back to the OCR on what they were doing. And the order was in place for 20 years. So think about the cost of doing all of that in addition to the $1 million fine versus just having an annual HIPAA compliance audit.
So for a large organization like that, I imagine that it was really a technical hack. Tell us how they got the information.
That was actually a reporter dumpster diving at one of the locations and finding lots, not just one piece, many pieces of PHI in the dumpster.
Yeah, so we find more and more in all the compliance audits we do, there's organizations that are heavy in one area and not the other. Mm-hmm. And this organization, I think we're heavy in a lot of spots, but no one thought of dumpster, the dumpster, they probably shredded some stuff, but it's crazy how, you can spend millions of dollars and then get $1 million fine because someone threw something in the trash. Yeah. So again,
it just goes to show that we all have blind spots.
Yes.
And that could be a whole nother webinar on many areas, but
right.
And I think to HIPAA compliance.
Right. And I think we go back to the beginning comment of, a third party is going to see the knock in the car. And, when you're doing something over and over again, you think you're great. And again, that's why we do things. We're trying to make the client a lot better, their controls better. And, it often helps the organization in many ways. I think even with staff, morale, etc. But we won't go there.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn over to Lynnanne to do our last polling question. I know you're all waiting for that. Ooh, and I almost missed it. Can I go back? There we go.
So our third polling question. I would be interested in learning more about a HIPAA compliance audit. Yes, of course, or not really. I hope I never have to do that.
Yeah, we could definitely do a deeper dive webinars. This was pretty high level and surface level and stating what is it and why might I need it. But yeah, there's a lot that we could cover here in articles and a lot more education that we could do on this topic if those of you are interested on the little bit that you heard today.
Yeah, I mean, we could really break this down into segments. I mean, we could have probably 8 to 10 series webinar on just different fragments of the of course we may lose people at that time.
5 seconds. I don't know, Dave. I don't know that I want to go that deep. If it was my organization, typically I might want to hear it and how we can improve, but looks like we closed the poll. So yeah, about half of you do. I can appreciate the half that hope they never have to do that. So at least now you know what a HIPAA compliance audit is. You know why you might need it. And our next slide is just to lead to some Q&A. So we do have about 6 minutes left. So we will try to focus this. So Dave, you told us that the average, with DHS comes in and audits you, the Office of Civil Rights enforces that. We heard about $1 million fine, and that is the average fine. So tell me, when do HIPAA audits, when do these typically occur? Like, how do you get targeted? And
so there's three.
How do you avoid it?
There's 3 different ways that I've seen, and maybe there's more, but 3 different ways that I've seen. Random is first thing, right? You're unlucky and you get picked, and really can't do anything about that. And then the other 2 ways, I feel like you can do things about it. The second way would be you have a breach, which then you disclose to the OCR. they're more than likely then to audit you, depending on the breach, et cetera. So, if you don't have a breach, that's helpful. And again, working with the controls, making sure that they're operating effectively, designed correctly, is going to help with that. Is it ever going to be perfect? No. Obviously, the weakest link is always staff, employees. So, how do you make sure that, someone doesn't look up someone else's patient record, and, maybe you're like, oh, it was my husband, my husband, my wife. What's wrong with that? Well, it's a direct, it's an issue, and it's a violation. So we want to make sure people know what they're doing. There's no breaches, but by far, I think most audits are caused by the sophisticated patient knowing, hey, I'm going to report this. There's an issue, and if there's enough issues, they're going to be audited. So again, let's make sure that we treat patients respectfully, we keep their data well, and confidential, and that there's that integrity between the patient and the whether it's a covered entity, a business associate, or a subcontractor. But those are the three different areas. And again, random, you can't do anything about, but I think we can close some gaps and do a better job.
Great, thanks, Dave. And I'll take one more question here. I'll direct this one to Lynnanne. So my company already gets a SOC 2. Dave was so nice to define that for all of us, so we know that that's a type of controls audit. So why should I get a HIPAA report as well?
Okay, so I can definitely understand where that question would be coming from, because a SOC 2 can cover confidentiality and it can also cover privacy. But the HIPAA compliance report will actually take that confidentiality and privacy, as well as all of the other controls around physical network and other security measures, and line them up with the HIPAA security and HIPAA breach notification rules, so that you or your client or whoever can see that you actually have them all covered in that document. So it is a nice little extra, nice to have in addition to a SOC 2.
Great, thanks, Lynnanne.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we answered all of your questions today. We are wrapping up here right on time. So on behalf of myself, Dave, and Lynnanne, thank you for your time and attention today. Thank you for the good questions. I hope you learned what we said you were going to learn. What is a HIPAA compliance audit and why do I need it? We know we typically have monthly webinars. We have ones coming up next month in June. So please check out our website and our newsletters for that. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.